return of a conquering hero. The family of the man of the hour, Colonel John H. Glenn, Jr., waits at Patrick Air Force Base near Cape Canaveral for this moment, this reunion. First to greet the astronaut is Mrs. Glenn, who shares this moment of love and devotion with their daughter, Carolyn Ann, and son, David. The girl from the Colonel's hometown, the partner in his trials and triumphs, snatches a few secret moments before cheering throngs claim their hero. Great tears spring to meeting eyes, for the heart must speak when the lips are dumb. Another to share the great moment is the astronaut's mother. And then his father. Mr. Glenn set the casual note for the day by asking his son, "How you doing?" From the air base, Colonel Glenn and his family are whisked the 18 miles to Cape Canaveral and welcoming signs of many and varied. At the Cape, where his 81,000-mile odyssey began, the Colonel is to receive the first of many honors the country waits to bestow. The President, after hearing a first-hand account of the flight from the Colonel, praises his unflinching courage in performing difficult tasks under conditions of great physical stress and personal danger. Then the President presents the Distinguished Service Medal of the Space Administration. Once more, Mrs. Glenn is brought into the spotlight with her family. This is but a preview of honors yet to come. The steady drizzle can't put a damper on the Washington reception for the nation's new star from outer space. Some 250,000 shouting admirers brave a roar of rain to roar their welcome as Colonel Glenn rides down Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House to the Capitol. The Colonel's famous grin never leaves his face as he acknowledges the cheers with a bow here and a wave there. Journey down the glory road that is Pennsylvania Avenue is at a snail's pace. Statisticians figure he could have traveled more than halfway around the world in outer space within the time it takes him to ride from the White House to the Capitol. Then, highest honors for the Colonel as he arrives at the nation's legislative halls to address a joint session of Congress. Both the floor and the galleries are jammed to capacity as Colonel Glenn arrives to a standing ovation. Before his address, he introduces members of his family. His father and mother watch proudly from the gallery. With a modesty that befits a man of awesome deeds, Colonel Glenn quickly wins his audience and has this to say to the nation.
Friendship 7, though, is just a beginning, a successful experiment. It is another plateau in our step-by-step program of increasingly ambitious flights. The earlier flights of Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom, who are over here, were stepping stones. Their efforts were stepping stones toward my flight in Friendship 7. I think after all of our talk about space, though, this morning coming up from Florida on the plane with President Kennedy, we had the opportunity to meet Mrs. Kennedy and Caroline before we took off. I think Caroline really cut us down to size and put us back in our proper position, though, when after being introduced, she looked up and said, "Where's the monkey?" Oh, listen, I didn't get a banana pellet on the whole ride. Seriously, though, I feel we're on the brink of an area of expansion of knowledge about ourselves and our surroundings that is beyond description or comprehension at this time. Today, I know that I seem to be standing alone on this great platform. just as I seem to be alone in the cockpit of the Friendship 7 spacecraft. But I'm not. There were with me then and with me now thousands of Americans and many hundreds of citizens of many countries around the world who contributed to this truly international undertaking voluntarily and in a spirit of cooperation and understanding. On behalf of all those people, I would like to express my and their heartfelt thanks for the honors you have bestowed upon us here today. We are all proud to have been privileged to be part of this effort, to represent our country as we have. As our knowledge of this universe in which we live increases, may God grant us wisdom and guidance to use it wisely. Thank you.
Tribute to the man and the team, the pride of the nation. There was a rising young star on the basketball horizon a few years ago in Philadelphia. He was Wilt Chamberlain, nearly 7 feet tall even then, who was the most remarkable high school hoop player ever to come on the scene. With his extraordinary height, he was head and shoulders over his rivals, you might say. During his high school days, there was no one in his class defensively, and when driving for a basket, Wilt was almost unstoppable. Every basketball-minded college wanted this young man, and he finally elected to go to the University of Kansas, where he proved invaluable in sparking his teams to victory. The crowds loved his defensive play as much as his offensive work. For such a tall man, he handled himself gracefully in every move. He blazed through his college years like a comet, and there wasn't a pro team in the country that didn't long to have him. He finally signed with the Philadelphia Warriors and was up against men of his own size and with more experience. But that didn't slow him. He set league records in his first year and has smashed them one by one since. His latest, he's the first man to score 100 points in a single game. There are few records left for Wilt to tilt. Amid all of the age-old pomp and splendor of the Vatican, Mrs. John F. Kennedy arrives for a private audience with Pope John XXIII. On her way to India, the First Lady stopped overnight in Rome. And for her audience with the Pope, she wears the traditional black with long sleeves. With the guards at attention in an anteroom, Mrs. Kennedy has a half-hour audience with the Pontiff. They needed no interpreter, for both the First Lady and the Pope speak fluent French. Mrs. Kennedy commented afterwards that the Pope was very affable and put her at ease immediately. She received religious tokens from him for herself and a doll dressed like a Swiss guard for Caroline. Then it was on to India for a semi-official visit to Prime Minister Nehru. White House honors for the grand old man of American letters. Robert Frost, celebrating his 88th birthday, receives the Congressional Medal in recognition of his contribution to U.S. literature. President Kennedy makes the award with the remark that it was a unanimous vote by Congress, adding that it was the only thing they've been able to agree on for a long time. In return, Mr. Frost presents Mr. Kennedy with a copy of his latest book, In the Clearing. Asked if he thought this might be his last book, the outspoken poet said he hopes his wits last a little longer, but he warned, one of these days, he may say something foolish. It's a three-way battle in the Masters at Augusta. Now Finstewald is one of the finalists the crowd is watching, along with Arnold Palmer, who has twice won this great golfing test. The third man to fight down to the last green is last year's winner, Gary Player. The huge crowd of 40,000 is holding its collective breath as the dramatic match reaches its climax. This putt of Finstewald's could clinch the match for him, but he misses. The day after this final round, the playoffs saw Finstewald drop out of the running, despite some steady work on the greens. As on the last regular round, Player wound up on the playoff 18th with a long putt that he had to sink to win. If he had downed the 70-footer, there would have been no playoff, but he left the way open for Palmer to come through in the last 9, 5 strokes under par to win the juicy $20,000 purse money. Gary Player came within an ace of repeating his win of last year and has to be satisfied with second money. It was the most thrilling brand of golf to be dished up in years. Spring! It's official. The opening of the baseball season sees President Kennedy on hand in Washington as the Senators play the Detroit Tigers in the new $20 million District of Columbia Stadium. The largest crowd in Washington baseball history, 45,000, and a couple of hundred photographers see the president throw out a looper for the players to scramble for in a free-for-all. Then it's play ball after the rain delays the game for 20 minutes and the Washington Senators go on to beat Detroit 4-1. Not in the memory of the oldest statistician have the Senators done so well on opening day. It may be the new stadium, or maybe they've adopted winning ways. President Kennedy devotes the greater portion of his news conference to criticizing the major steel companies for raising steel prices by $6 a ton.
The simultaneous and identical actions of United States Steel and other leading steel corporations increasing steel prices by some $6 a ton constitute a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. In short, at a time when they could be exploring how more efficiency and better prices could be obtained, reducing prices in this industry, in recognition of lower costs, their unusually good labor contract, their foreign competition, and their increase in production and profits which are coming this year, a few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices in ruthless disregard of their public responsibilities. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country, and I asked the steel companies. In the last 24 hours, we had their answer.
It's the economic news of the year. The next day, the chairman of the board of U.S. Steel, Roger Blau, gave his economic reasons why.
As employees and stockholders, we, along with thousands of other employees and stockholders, both union and non-union, must discharge faithfully our responsibilities to United States Steel. But as citizens, we must also discharge fully our responsibilities to the nation. The action we have taken is designed to meet both those responsibilities. Now, what this all means is that as a nation, we keep ahead in the race among nations through machinery and equipment, through good productive facilities, through jobs that are vitally linked to the industrial stream. Surely our workmen are as good as any in the world, but they must have the tools with which to compete. In other words, we compete as a company, as an industry, and as a nation with better costs and better ways of production. Proper pricing is certainly part of that picture.
The film capital's big night. The Santa Monica Civic Auditorium is the scene of the Oscar Awards, and Rock Hudson reads the first thrilling announcement. Best Supporting Actress, Rita Moreno, and she's wide-eyed over the whole thing.
I can't believe it!
Then there's the popular choice with the crowd, as Joan Crawford makes the presentation for the Best Actor. The Oscar goes to Maximilian Schell. Burt Lancaster calls out the name of the best actress. She is Sophia Loren, the first actress in a foreign language film to be so honored. And Greer Garson receives the Oscar for the absent Sophia. Then the breathless climax as the audience hears the best picture of the year named by Fred Astaire. The film is The West Side Story, a musical tale of passions and conflict in New York slums. Co-director and producer Robert Wise receives the statuette for his fellow artists. Hollywood had a great year and West Side Story topped them all. The first World's Fair in the United States in 22 years has its gala opening in Seattle. There are 74 acres of educational and entertainment exhibits at this $80 million exposition that is expected to play host to 10 million visitors during its 4-month run. The theme of the fair is Century 21, and it looks like a bright summer in its future. The first official ceremony before the fair actually gets underway calls for the light from a distant star to send a signal to the fairgrounds as President Kennedy presses a telegraph key. Light that left the star 10,000 years ago releases balloons, and the Seattle World's Fair is underway. Navy and Air Force planes join in the salute to the exposition that has exhibits from 27 nations on display. Progress in science is a dominant feature of the fair that is attempting to mirror the world's future. So this summer, it's come to the fair in Seattle. A centuries-old tradition is broken in Britain as Prince Charles goes to school in Scotland. The heir to the throne of England is to attend Gordonstoun, the alma mater of his father, Prince Philip. Queen Elizabeth broke with the tradition of tutors for royal heirs in favor of this school noted for its austerity. Charles will sleep in a dormitory with a dozen other boys and will be routed out at 7 a.m. for a run around the grounds. Rumor has it that the young prince was reluctant about attending this academy with its Spartan routine, but was quickly overruled by the Queen. A dill or a dollar, they have a royal scholar. Running of the Kentucky Derby, the classic in American horse racing, sees an estimated 100,000 horse lovers and picnickers crowded into historic Churchill Downs. When the style parade is finished and the last mint julep downed, it will be time to get down to the business at hand, the run for the roses. Willie Hardtack is aboard decidedly, but retired Eddie Arcaro has no mount for the first time in many years as the crowd awaits the parade to the post. Number 3 is decidedly destined to be the hero today, and he is followed by the favorite, Raidan. Purse money is $162,000, with $119,000 going to the horse who can get home first, 1.25 miles from the start. An extreme long shot, Lead Town is pacing the pack around the first turn, but it's a long way home. Sunrise County is second, Admiral's Voyage third, and Raidan, the favorite, is fourth. Down the backstretch and Lead Town is finished. Raidan moves up, but Sunrise County moves faster and takes over the lead by a head. Around the final turn and that payoff dash down the stretch, Admiral's Voyage, Sunrise County, Raidan, and a long shot, Roman Line. It looks like those are the horses which will land in the money when decidedly number 3 moves and starts up on the outside. He passes Raidan and then Roman Line. Watch as he thunders home, pulling away. He wins the Roses by more than 2 lengths and chalks up a new Derby record, clipping a full second from the mark set by Whirlaway in 1941. Decidedly is the horse, Decidedly. Even at the height of the campaign, President Kennedy hardly put in a busier weekend than this one in New York. First, he presides at the dedication of new apartment houses, along with Governor Rockefeller. The project was sponsored by the Garment Workers Union, and the president called on all unions to widen their social aims and to cooperate with private business and the government in expanding the national economy. Later that day, he's guest of honor at a Democratic Party fundraising rally at Madison Square Garden. 15,000 people pay from $3 to $1,000 to honor Mr. Kennedy, who receives 5 feet of birthday cake. The party anticipates the actual date of his 45th birthday, but it wipes out the deficit. The next afternoon, the busy president is back in the garden to address a rally of older people on his medical care bill. It's an overflow crowd of the elderly, ranging from their 60s to 108 years of age. They hear Mr. Kennedy say that hospitalization under Social Security is as inevitable as the tide. The president, who is facing opposition from the American Medical Association, likens his campaign for the bill to the fight for Social Security in the 30s. A man from outer space returns to the U.S. and to a welcome from his wife and family that has him flying once more. Astronaut Scott Carpenter, fresh from his 3-time orbit of the Earth, has a few intimate moments with his wife and children before being surrendered to the crowds who wait to greet him. The astronaut and his wife and 4 children are all the focus of attention as the latest of U.S. space pioneers rides from Patrick Air Force Base back to the scene of his takeoff for space. Where the great flight began for Carpenter, other members of the Project Mercury team are gathered to see the 4th American to reach outer space receive an award. His mother is a proud witness as Commander Carpenter receives the Space Distinguished Service Medal. This is but one of a series of heroes' welcomes for Carpenter. Next is Denver, and then a whoop-de-doo in Boulder, Colorado, his hometown. First, however, there's a press conference for the man who had the entire world praying for his safety. Contact was lost after landing. He is quick to deny that he experienced any difficulty as he approached the end of the 3rd orbit.
I understand the report came from Hawaii that it was a tired and confused astronaut. If my opinion is worth anything to you, this is not true. I will admit to being preoccupied. I would like to apologize for the concern I caused the people who watched the flight, for the concern in the control center. Had I known how concerned you were, I would have been concerned. But I was not. The problem was in communications. My status was good throughout, and in many respects this was as easy as a bus ride.
The spoon proves mightier than the bars and supposedly escape-proof Alcatraz prison. 3 bank robbers serving long terms scratched their way through grills covering an air vent, climbed a drainage pipe, and disappeared from the forbidding rock in San Francisco Bay. It appears to be the first successful escape in the history of the maximum security prison, and the flight is attributed by Warden Olin Blackwell to the deteriorating condition of the prison, crumbling concrete and eroding metals, with $5 million needed for repairs. The men the walls couldn't hold are Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. Authorities believe that Morris, who has a superior IQ, masterminded the escape. Ironically, the wanted posters offer only the nominal reward of $50 each for information leading to the arrest of the prisoners. They painstakingly fashioned dummies of plaster with hair of paintbrush bristles to stand in for them during cell check, while they covered an escape hole with a cardboard grill. All of this was within easy visual range of the guards in the gun galleries. They climbed drain pipes to the top of the cell block and then slid down vents to the ground. Again, all of this within sight of guards. The escape triggered the greatest manhunt in San Francisco's history, as agents of the FBI, Coast Guardsmen, Highway Patrol, sheriff's deputies, and local police join in the search. Whatever their fate, the three convicts have apparently accomplished a feat that many have tried with no success. Arnold Power and young Jack Nicklaus start a playoff for the United States Open Championship at Oakmont, Pennsylvania. Power tees off. Now Nicklaus. A record-breaking crowd had seen Nicklaus tie Palmer the day before with a 283. Palmer's second is behind a trap, and his prospects are not bright. At the 18th and final hole, Nicklaus putts with more dash than accuracy, but he can afford to. Palmer's putting is off today. And he concedes the victory by 3 strokes to Nicklaus's 71. Crowd and Mrs. Nicklaus cheer the 22-year-old champ. The first question at President Kennedy's news conference deals with the Supreme Court decision that a New York school prayer violates constitutional separation of church and state. The president's statement is in the nature of an effort to calm the storm over the decision.
Well, I haven't seen the measures in the Congress, and you'd have to make a determination of what the language was and what the effect it would have on the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has made its judgment. A good many people obviously will disagree with it. Others will agree with it. But I think that it is important for us, if we're going to maintain our constitutional principle, that we support Supreme Court decisions even when we may not agree with them. In addition, we have in this case a very easy remedy, and that is to pray ourselves. And I would think that it would be a welcome reminder to every American family that we can pray a good deal more at home, we can attend our churches with a good deal more fidelity, and we can make the true meaning of prayer much more important in the lives of all of our children. That power is very much open to us. And I would hope that as a result of this decision that all American parents will intensify their efforts at home.
The president's visit to Mexico is marked by the most tumultuous reception ever recorded, Mr. Kennedy. It's a big, warm, noisy ovation, packed with emotion. Longtime residents say nothing like it has ever occurred before in this capital of Latin American exuberance. Estimates of the crowd on the route from the airport to the city set the number cheering the president at 2 million. The 9-mile ride from the airport to President Adolfo Lopez Mateo's residence takes an hour and 18 minutes, and at no point was there one untoward incident or an anti-American sign. From the moment of his arrival, it was a triumph for Mr. Kennedy. The first formal event is a luncheon in his honor, and the president sets the tone of his visit and wins immediate acclaim by pointing out that the United States was determined to reinforce the inter-American principle of absolute respect for the independence of every nation. Despite an overeager Army technician, he is able to offer a toast to the traditions that have made the two countries friends. Everywhere, crowds turn out to cheer Mr. Kennedy. At a visit to a government-sponsored low-cost housing project, the president insists on stepping from the platform to shake hands with the residents. It's a gesture that brings forth even warmer cheers. The president said that the kind of revolution Latin America needed consisted of decent homes, jobs, and education. He added that he had seen many housing projects, but nothing like this. The visit has more of an air of fiesta than a state occasion. The two leaders hold a series of talks that total 5 hours, and they are able to resolve many of the differences between the two countries, although some problems still remain. They agree on new measures to reduce contamination in the Colorado River by the United States, a river that irrigates much of Mexico's farmlands. and the U.S. also extended a $20 million loan. Mr. Kennedy begins his second and final day by laying wreaths at the tombs of two of Mexico's heroes, and then attending Mass at the holiest of that nation's shrines, the Basilica of Guadalupe. They are greeted by the Primate Archbishop of Mexico, Miguel Gomez, who later led a prayer in English for the full success to all efforts made during the President's visit. After Mass, the Kennedys head for the airport and then home to Washington. Last week, there was uncertainty in capital circles about the President's reception in Mexico. It turned out to be one of his greatest triumphs in personal diplomacy. A dilapidated row of run-down garages in Jersey City is the scene of a stranger-than-fiction tale that has the man on the street gasping. In one of the garages, workmen discovered a hoard of money that totaled $2,400,000, which the authorities, you may be sure, immediately impounded. The money was found in 2 bags, cached in the rear of this ancient automobile, along with criminal files stolen from the local prosecutor's office. It took 14 agents nearly 5 hours to count the bills, which they say belong to a convicted gambler now in jail. He just isn't talking. Meanwhile, Treasury officials have put a tax lien on the money, and it's a legal puzzle as to its ownership. From a ground station nestled in the mountains at Andover, Maine, a signal is sent to a speeding satellite, an historic feat that could reshape man's future. That satellite, of course, is the Telstar, 170 pounds of complex electronic equipment that receives signals beamed from Earth, magnifies them 10 billion times, and rebroadcasts them back to Earth. Pictures, telephone calls, telegraph messages, and computer data all can be handled by the orbiting device. The Telstar receives its power from batteries that are recharged by the sapphire-coated solar cells, which in turn are activated by rays from the sun as it hurtles through space at a low point of 600 miles to a high of 3,500 miles. The Telstar is sent aloft from Cape Canaveral atop a Thor Delta rocket in a joint industry-government effort. The Space Administration team handles the launching for AT&T, and it's a $50 million phone call for the telephone company. Future plans call for the orbiting of 20 to 25 satellites like the Telstar. Thus, when one passes out of range of ground stations, another will be coming into position. Presently, along with the ground station in Maine, there is a receiver and transmitter in Great Britain at Cornwall, and in France on the coast of Brittany. Even as Telstar is launched, the French rush to complete their installation to receive a signal that night. Now the rocket climbs far into the atmosphere, and the Telstar is about to separate and orbit the Earth each 2.5 hours. Starting with the 6th orbit and through the 9th, the Telstar is in range of both the U.S. and European stations, and pictures are received clearly in France, with somewhat lesser success in Britain on this first test. The signals are beamed from this 18-story dome that houses the super-sensitive horn weighing nearly 400 tons, an antenna so delicately tuned that it picks up a mere whisper of a signal from the satellite and amplifies it again billions of times for rebroadcast over cables or the air. Now comes the historic moment, a moment compared in significance with the first message sent over the telegraph. This is the first picture transmitted to outer space and received back again on Earth. Scenes of the dome at Andover are flashed across the sea, and man marks another milestone in this age of scientific miracles. So proudly it waves. What does the future hold? Well, scientists visualize a belt of Telstars encircling the globe in such a manner that transmission will be continuous around the world. Both sides of the Earth can be in immediate photographic contact, communication that could bring better understanding among men. History is about to be made in the science of communication among men. Technicians in Europe prepare to receive a signal from the orbiting Telstar satellite that opens this new era. This is the first formal exchange of an official transmission, a beaming of the presidential press conference to the continent where most of Europe can witness democracy at work. The president has these historic words.
I understand that part of today's press conference is being relayed by the Telstar communications satellite to viewers across the Atlantic, and this is another indication of the extraordinary world in which we live. This satellite must be high enough to carry messages from both sides of the world, which is, of course, a very essential requirement for peace, and I think this understanding, which will inevitably come from the speedier communications, is bound to increase the well-being and security of all people here and those across the oceans.
JFK got a surprise at his recent birthday party held at Madison Square Garden.
Marilyn Monroe. A woman about whom it truly may be said she needs no introduction. But let me just say, here she is. But I'll give her an introduction anyway, Mr. President, because in the history of show business, perhaps there has been no one female who meant so much, who has done more. Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you. Thanks, Mr. President, for all the things you've done, the battles that you've won, the way you deal with U.S. Steel and our problems by the ton. We thank you so much. Everybody, happy birthday!
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. I can now retire from politics after having had Happy Birthday sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way.
One of the the most famous stars in Hollywood history is dead at 36. Marilyn Monroe was found dead in bed under circumstances that were in tragic contrast to her glamorous career as a comic talent. On the surface, she seemed to have such a zest for life. Her international appeal took her from command appearances to the other side of the world and entertainment for Korean GIs. The star led a far from normal childhood and had 12 sets of foster parents, leading her to say in her last interview that she was never used to being happy, so it wasn't something she ever took for granted. She never let her personal feelings interfere with her job, and she was the idol of the GIs, the animation of foxhole dreams. She found no happiness in marriage. Her second husband was baseball immortal Joe DiMaggio, and that marriage ended as had her first in divorce. Her third husband was playwright Arthur Miller, and they too separated. Miss Monroe played in 23 films since her debut in 1950, films that grossed $200 million. The Golden Girl received 5,000 fan letters a week, and to those fans, she never let any personal problems dim her screen glamour. Despite flashes of temperament and tantrums, she turned in performances that kept her among the greatest box office favorites in motion picture history. The curtain falls. Brief and simple rites mark the funeral of Marilyn Monroe, as former husband Joe DiMaggio leads a small group of friends in a last tribute to the glamorous actress. Only 25 persons were invited to the services, and no screen stars were in attendance. Miss Monroe's dramatic coach delivered the eulogy, saying he had no words to describe the myth and the legends that grew up about her. The film star's coffin is then moved to a crypt as Mr. DiMaggio and his Marine Corps son walked with other mourners in the cortege. "500 curiosity seekers were kept at a distance all during the ceremonies, and Mr. DiMaggio and his son were among the last to leave. The final fade-out to the story of the poor girl who became a movie star is written finis." The culmination of a dream that began more than a half-century ago. The Trans-Canada Highway is officially open as Prime Minister Diefenbaker unveils a plaque at Roger Pass in British Columbia and then tamps the last bit of pavement into place. From St. John's, Newfoundland, this superb engineering feat stretches nearly 5,000 miles to the west, terminating at Victoria, British Columbia. From the protective snow tunnels to the 4,000-foot climb over the Rockies, the new highway will offer the motorists both safety and beauty, with every turn unveiling new vistas. It's a billion-dollar dream that has at last become reality. The greatest spectacle in yachting, the defense of the America's Cup by the United States, draws 50,000 spectators to the first day of the series off Newport, Rhode Island. Prominent among the fans is the President, who views this yachting World Series aboard a Navy destroyer. He and Mrs. Kennedy are aboard the Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., named for his brother who died in the war. So great is the press of spectator boats that the start is delayed for an hour until the course can be cleared. Australia's Gretel jumps the gun by a few seconds and comes about, while the American Weatherly is coming to the mark. They get squared away quickly and head out on the lowered leg of the course. They sail the 6-mile lowered windward course twice, a 24-mile run. Weatherly jumps into the lead right at the start, and she's never headed by a determined Australian challenger. The Gretel finds the wind, which gets up to 18 knots, just a little too much. When Weatherly rounds the marker for the windward run, she has 350 yards on the Gretel. Her crew handles her beautifully. On the windward run, Weatherly breaks out her spinnaker and spinnaker staysail, with the Gretel following suit as they speed for home. At the second mark, Weatherly had a 1-minute and 12-second lead. Now on the final leg, she's pushing farther and farther ahead. The sleek yachts present a picture of verve and grace as they run before the wind. finish, the Weatherly is showing saucy heels to the Gretel. She's better than 3 minutes ahead and widening the gap. The Gretel just didn't like the turbulence, and as she follows the Weatherly to the finish, her skipper signals that he wants a day's postponement of the 4 out of 7 match for some changes. It's a triumphant Weatherly who furls the sails that carried her to a spanking victory. County Courthouse in Tyler, Texas is the scene of the fraud trial of Billy Saul Estes. The master promoter has been in the headlines since last March, when his arrest by federal agents revealed his multi-million-dollar dealings in liquid fertilizer, grain storage, and cotton allotments. Texas is prosecuting him for fraud, with cameras on hand to report the proceedings. The trial was moved 500 miles from Estes' hometown at the request of defense attorneys, but Judge Otis Dunnigan refused their request to bar cameras, saying that the public had the right to see how the trial progresses. The defense was successful in getting a postponement to round up witnesses, which will also defer a federal prosecution. James H. Meredith is formally enrolled at the University of Mississippi, ending one chapter in the federal government's efforts to desegregate the university. The town of Oxford is an armed camp, following riots that accompanied the registration of the first Negro in the university's 118-year history. Much of this film record was destroyed when our cameraman, Gordon Yoder, was attacked, but he did salvage pictures of Governor Ross Barnett at the scene. The governor fought the court order long and bitterly before modifying his stand, saying Mississippi was overpowered by the federal government. President Kennedy appealed to the students and to the people of the state to comply peacefully with the law and bring the crisis to an end. Even as he talked, riots were breaking out in Oxford.
Americans are free and sure to disagree with the law, but not to disobey it. For in a government of laws and not of men, no man, however prominent or powerful, and no mob, however unruly or boisterous, is entitled to defy a court of law. If this country should ever reach the point where any man or group of men, by force or threat of force, could long deny the commands of our court and our Constitution, then no law would stand free from doubt. No judge would be sure of his writ, and no citizen would be safe from his neighbors.
Nearly 6,000 troops patrol Oxford to maintain order, and arrests mount to more than 200 as smaller disturbances erupt the next day. Former Major General Edwin Walker, who came here from his home in Texas, is put under arrest and held in high bail on charges of inciting insurrection. He was flown to a federal prison hospital as relative calm settled on the town in the greatest crisis the South has faced since the Civil War. Tearing through the building with the force of a bomb blast, an exploding boiler takes 21 lives in this New York telephone company building and leaves nearly 100 injured. The boiler, weighing more than a ton, was blown into the building cafeteria where 100 employees were having lunch. It rocketed through the room, struck the ceiling, bounced back, and smashed through the opposite wall, killing and maiming those in its path. The injured were taken to 3 hospitals as disaster squads, police, and firemen were joined by doctors and nurses in rescue work. The cause of the blast is still unknown, but a defective safety valve was found in the wreckage of the telephone accounting building. It had been the first time the boiler had been fired this season, and it had been subject to safety checks. Heartbreak and tragedy on a sunny autumn day. Majestic Mont Blanc, highest mountain in Western Europe, straddles the shortest auto route between Paris and Rome. But today it marks the beginning of the end of the detour now necessary. Teams of French and Italian workmen have gallons of champagne on hand to celebrate the holing through of the 7-mile tunnel that will be ready next year to cut the travel distance between the 2 capitals by 125 miles. Today, the climax of a 175-year dream sees Professor Loris Corby of Italy left greet his French counterpart, Professor André Bory. The holing through is completed. Now is the time for all good workmen to cheer their stupendous feat and to raise their glasses in a toast to victory. The Mont Blanc Tunnel will go down as one of the great engineering feats of the century. 44,000 fans in Candlestick Park for the 7th and final World Series game. See the first scoring action in the 5th inning as Yankee Bill Skowron singles. This is a nip-and-tuck ball game, a game that decides the title. With Skowron on first, Clete Boyer singles sharply to left center. The ball is long enough to send Skowron to third as the throw comes into second. Fans see Yankee pitcher Ralph Terry walk and Jack Sanford pitch to Kubik. Skowron scores on the double play ball, and that lone run is destined to be the biggest the Yankees scored all season. In the 7th, the Giants' Willie Mays hits a soaring ball to deep left center, and Tom Tresh makes a spectacular catch. It's a save that keeps the Yankees in front, for Willie McCovey next up smashes a powerhouse into the teeth of the gale that blew all day, and it falls over Mickey Mantle's head for a spectacular triple. Giant fans keep their fingers crossed, but Terry comes through to strike out Orlando Cepeda and end the threat. The Giants go down fighting in the 9th as pinch hitter Matty Alou bunts his way on base. Then 2 men strike out, bringing to bat the mighty Willie Mays, San Francisco's last hope. Here is all of the drama and excitement as Terry pitches and Mays smashes a double down the right field line. Only swift work by Roger Maris prevents Alou from crossing with the tying run, but the Giants are still breathing. McCovey comes up and lines one to Bobby Richardson, who freezes to the ball, and the Yankees remain the world champions. The New Yorkers swarm over pitcher Ralph Terry in jubilation as they prepare to celebrate their 20th World Series victory, a record far ahead of any other team in history. There is no joy in San Francisco except in the Yankee clubhouse. In the 7 games, the Yankees were outscored by the Giants 21-20. But the New Yorkers came up with the runs that counted. So, it's hail to the champs.
We now know that the Soviet Union, not content with Dr. Castro's oath of fealty, not content with the destruction of Cuban independence, not content with the extension of Soviet power into the Western Hemisphere, not content with a challenge to the inter-American system and to the United Nations Charter, has decided to transform Cuba into a base for communist aggression, into a base for putting all of the Americas under the nuclear gun, and thereby to intensify the Soviet diplomacy of blackmail in every part of the world.
The United States answer to what Adlai Stevenson termed Soviet blackmail in Cuba was a quarantine of all offensive weapons being shipped from Russia to that island fortress. The U.S. threw up a steel fence prepared to stop any vessel carrying materials of war. In Cuba itself, 100,000 men were put under emergency orders as they had been during past invasion scares. The waterfront in Havana and along other parts of the coast bristled with gun emplacements as the Cuban regime waited to see what their bosses in the Kremlin were to do. Cuba became the focus of world attention. Here centered the most critical threat of global war since the surrender of Germany 17 years ago. Castro has put every able-bodied man through military training. He has even armed some as young as 12 years of age, and authorities assembled thousands in cities and villages for patriotic rallies. As in the past, these rallies are designed to whip up hate of what Castro calls Yankee imperialistic warmongers. To suggestions that a UN team inspect missile sites, Castro said that they had better come ready for combat. He went on to call President Kennedy a pirate for setting up the quarantine. The United States arrived at the decision for an arms blockade after studying reconnaissance photographs made with high-powered cameras from planes flying several miles from the Cuban coast. These cameras are described as capable of spotting a golf ball on a putting green from 40,000 feet. Literally thousands of pictures can be made on each flight by these planes, and they are studied by photo interpreters who are capable of analyzing details that an untrained eye would miss. Here, for example, is a medium-range ballistic missile base that has been labeled by these specialists. Suddenly, the veil is torn from the Russian secrets. Another photo revealed a surface-to-air missile assembly depot, a base to supply the offensive sites. Russian technicians ripped through heavy jungle growth to carve out airstrips for high-performance MiG-21 jets, a plane easily capable of strikes far into the United States. In the greatest display of hemisphere solidarity since World War II, the Organization of American States unanimously endorses the actions of the United States, and many pledge arms and men to the cause. The vote is 20-0, with Cuba absent, commending the U.S. for its efforts to bring about the dismantling of the missile bases. The organization votes the use of armed force to carry out the resolution sponsored by Secretary of State Dean Rusk, thus uniting all of the Americas in a common cause. Meanwhile, the United States continues to reinforce its Cuban base at Guantanamo Bay, the naval depot that Castro wants the U.S. to give up. These Marines have been assigned the job of protecting the base against any Cuban threats that might arise during the present crisis. They'll be on a 24-hour alert, a first line of defense. The United States went to the UN Security Council for a resolution calling for a withdrawal of all offensive weapons from Cuba. A delegation from the island heard adjutant call on both sides for a 3-week freeze, but the Secretary General was told that President Kennedy wants the missiles scrapped first. Valerian A. Zorin's boss, Khrushchev, proposed that the U.S. withdraw its vessels and he would stop shipments. President Kennedy's missile scrapping demand was his reply. The U.S. resolution was firm and strongly worded.
Mr. President, I am submitting today a resolution to the Security Council designed to find a way out of this calamitous situation. This resolution calls, as an interim measure under Article 40 of the Charter, for the immediate dismantling and withdrawal from Cuba of all missile and other offensive weapons. It further authorizes and requests the Acting Secretary General to dispatch to Cuba a United Nations Observer Corps to assure and report on compliance with this resolution. Upon UN certification of compliance, it calls for the termination of the measures of quarantine against military shipments to Cuba. And in conclusion, it urgently recommends that the United States and the Soviet Union confer promptly on measures to remove the existing threat to the security of the Western Hemisphere and the peace of the world.
The retreat to Moscow. Russian ships steam out from Cuban ports with their decks loaded with missiles the Soviets are withdrawing under pressure from the New World. It's one of the last chapters in the offensive threat from Cuba that led the United States to throw a quarantine around that island and force the Russians to dismantle their medium-range rocket installations. U.S. planes and picket ships have counted 42 rockets on Russian-bound ships. But still unresolved is the question of the jet bombers in Cuba. Castro claims they belong to him and that he will not give them up. The U.S. insists the Russians must remove them before the quarantine will be lifted. A final chapter in the Cuban crisis is brought to a close as President Kennedy holds a news conference to announce that Soviet bombers on Cuban soil would be withdrawn by Russia. These are the planes that Castro claimed he would not relinquish. But Mr. Kennedy says that he has a pledge right from the Kremlin.
I have today been informed by Chairman Khrushchev that all of the IL-28 bombers now in Cuba will be withdrawn in 30 days. He also agrees that these planes can be observed and counted as they leave. Inasmuch as this goes a long way towards reducing the danger which faced this hemisphere 4 weeks ago, I have this afternoon instructed the Secretary of Defense to lift our naval quarantine. We will not, of course, abandon the political, economic, and other efforts of this hemisphere to halt subversion from Cuba, nor our purpose and hope that the Cuban people shall someday be truly free. But these policies are very different from any intent to launch a military invasion of the island. May I add this final thought? In this week of Thanksgiving, there is much for which we can be grateful. As we look back to where we stood only 4 weeks ago, the unity of this hemisphere, the support of our allies, and the calm determination of the American people.
A bevy of 54 beauties parade in Atlantic City in the finals for the title of Miss America. It's a parade of pulchritudinous peaches. 54 good reasons to see America first. Elimination follows on elimination, and a final choice has the judges in a tizzy. With the wisdom of Solomon, they point the finger of fame at Miss Ohio, who covers her tear-stained face in the great tradition of beauty contest winners. Miss Ohio is Jacqueline Jean Mayer, a 20-year-old co-ed. Her new crown will bring rewards more substantial than fame, for the title is worth about $75,000, a queenly ransom. She receives a right royal tribute from 20,000 subjects assembled at the seashore resort. Next day, the new queen poses with the world at her feet. Jacqueline Jean Mayer, may the crown rest easy on her pretty head. A massive assault on polio gets underway in Texas as 10 counties aim to reach 1.5 million people with doses of the Sabin oral vaccine. A concerted campaign brings long lines of people to school centers on the first day to the delight of authorities. It was recommended that even those who had already taken the 3-shot Salk vaccine receive the oral doses that are taken painlessly on a lump of sugar. It's a striking display of community cooperation. There are special arrangements for those too young to swallow the sugar. A drop of health. Authorities were elated that the youngsters took to the immunization plan, looking on it as one big lark. An ounce of prevention multiplied by 1.5 million. It's a family outing in Lewis Bay Hyannisport for the Kennedys. The president, accompanied by his convalescing father, his brothers, and a full complement of children, relaxes from the cares of Washington with a day on the water. Mrs. Kennedy swims with astronaut John Glenn, a weekend guest, before they team up to put on an aqua show of their own. The president stays on the sidelines as Mrs. Kennedy and high-flying Glenn practically go into orbit aboard water skis. Mrs. Ethel Kennedy, wife of the Attorney General, is at the controls of the towboat, and she turns on the steam. The astronaut and the First Lady put on a dazzling show, the Hyannisport Watercade of 1962. Everything is shipshape aboard the Coast Guard bark Eagle, as cadets pipe aboard their Commander-in-Chief, who also happens to be a weekend sailor of note. Mr. Kennedy is welcoming the training ship on its return from a summer cruise in European waters. The 3-masted vessel carries 160 cadets, and the president is able to greet many of them personally. There were a few in the brig who also welcomed his visit, for they were granted pardons by the president. A lover of the sea, Mr. Kennedy had one descriptive word for the clean-line bark: magnificent. A new nation is born. The island of Jamaica, for 307 years a British possession, welcomes Princess Margaret and the Earl of Snowdon here to represent Queen Elizabeth at independence ceremonies. The princess is greeted by island dignitaries, including the Prime Minister, Sir William Bustamante, before riding through the streets of Kingston to a roaring reception. The country will be a dominion within the British Commonwealth and thus still maintain ties to all that the princess represents. At the stroke of midnight come impressive ceremonies led by the Prime Minister as the flag of the new nation is proudly raised on high. The island that has been under European domination since it was discovered by Columbus in 1494 embarks on a new era. The nation will be governed by a parliamentary democracy with a Senate and a House of Representatives. And when the reins of government are turned over to Prime Minister Bustamante, Jamaica becomes the first nation in the Western Hemisphere to gain independence since Panama became self-governing in 1903. Jamaica's economy is on more solid ground than other West Indian islands, but the new nation will need continuing aid before she becomes self-sufficient, a new member of the family of democratic nations. The first airport specifically built for the jet age is dedicated near the nation's capital. Dulles International Airport is served by mobile lounges that transfer passengers from the terminal building to their planes often a mile away. Costing $250,000, these buses snuggle right up to the plane to discharge their passengers. 27 miles from Washington in Virginia, the airport is dedicated by President Kennedy with former President Eisenhower participating. Twice the size of Idlewild in New York, it is named for John Foster Dulles, noted Secretary of State under Mr. Eisenhower. The President paid high tribute to Mr. Dulles and his family, who have served the government so long and faithfully. It opens a new era in travel comfort. Airliner of the future. This is a model of a supersonic jet which Britain and France hope will dominate transatlantic travel. Flying at twice the speed of sound, it will hop the ocean in 3 hours. Representatives of the two countries sign an agreement to share the $300 million cost and hope to have the plane operational by 1968. The Delta Wing craft will carry 100 passengers and cruise at 1,400 miles an hour. Engineers say it can use present runways and fly so high there will be no sonic shock when it breaks the sound barrier. The world grows smaller. Neither Paris nor the rest of France is showing any great interest in President Charles de Gaulle's referendum on changing the laws governing the election of the French president. Despite pleas from parties of all political shades, the voters don't turn out in the numbers de Gaulle had envisioned. Just about 75% of the eligible electorate cast their ballots. But of those, General de Gaulle is backed by 61%. He had threatened to resign if the voters did not back his referendum to elect the president by popular vote and not by a selected college of 30,000 notables. It is a de Gaulle victory, but far from the overwhelming votes of confidence that he has been able to muster in the past. President de Gaulle polls the smallest vote since he took over in 1958, but he looks on it as a personal victory. The Vatican Ecumenical Council, the greatest assembly of Roman Catholic prelates in history, has 5 American cardinals present, including Francis Cardinal McIntyre of Los Angeles. There are nearly 3,000 high Roman Catholic dignitaries attending, as well as a score of observers from Protestant faiths. This is the first ecumenical council in 92 years, and only the second in 400 years. It is solemnly opened as Pope John XXIII is carried into St. Peter's on his portable throne. 10,000 churchmen take part in the opening ceremonies of the council, which is expected to last for many months. The medieval pomp and pageantry is captured by newsreel cameras to be flashed around the world by Telstar. The council's immediate aim is to make church laws more compatible with modern times and to work towards a long-range plan of Christian unity. 81 cardinals are present. Missing is Cardinal Mindszenty of Hungary, who is in political asylum in the American legation there, and 3 who are ill. In his address, the Pope called for all to work for a union of mankind in truth, saying that divine providence is leading men to a new order of human relations. In a stirring display of earthly grandeur and spiritual dedication, the Vatican Ecumenical Council begins its historic work. Death has come to one of the world's most extraordinary and beloved women. Eleanor Roosevelt poses with her family as her husband embarks on his presidential career, the climax of a battle that was nurtured and encouraged by Mrs. Roosevelt after her husband was stricken with polio. The Roosevelts followed President and Mrs. Hoover into the White House, and Mrs. Roosevelt transformed the duty of a First Lady from that of a mere social hostess to one of aggressive participation in national life and affairs. With the inauguration of Mr. Roosevelt for his first term, there followed 12 years of a vivacious and tireless First Lady who made her impact felt around the world. In the shadow of her famous husband, Mrs. Roosevelt became widely traveled, and the joke was that even coal miners far underground could expect a visit. The Girl Scouts always had a warm welcome for the woman who worked so tirelessly in their behalf. When the war came, Mrs. Roosevelt threw all of her limitless energies into the effort. She visited bases throughout the world. She adopted war orphans. She led war bond campaigns and drove herself relentlessly. She walked with the great and the humble. King George and his queen welcomed Mrs. Roosevelt to Britain, the first time a president's wife had traveled abroad. At the same time, she was the only First Lady with an honorary degree, just one of the great accolades that she received from many nations. On the other side of the world, she was acclaimed by Prime Minister Nehru and the Indian nation. An admirer of Gandhi, she spurred many efforts to aid India's millions. A dear and intimate friend was Winston Churchill, who visited the Roosevelt home in Hyde Park, New York, to lay a wreath on her husband's grave, where she will rest by his side. Mrs. Roosevelt's abiding love was the children of all nations, colors, and creeds. She delighted in welcoming them to the national shrine that is Hyde Park to show them the historical mementos of President Roosevelt's life. President's wife, author of note, international humanitarian and philanthropist, Eleanor Roosevelt leaves behind a warm legacy of accomplishment.